Dr. Alex Carter stood in the midst of a lush alien forest, marveling at the bioluminescent plants that glowed softly around him, casting an otherworldly light. He had spent months preparing for this research mission, venturing out to study alien flora that existed on the fringes of the galaxy. As a xenobiologist, he reveled in the opportunity to observe these ecosystems firsthand, documenting their unique adaptations and uncovering their secrets. Each leaf, each pulse of light was a puzzle piece in the vast mosaic of life that he was so dedicated to understanding. Alex knelt to examine a peculiar flower, its petals shifting in color from deep violet to a brilliant cerulean. He took a sample with delicate precision, his thoughts absorbed by the plant's potential medicinal properties. It was in these quiet moments that he felt most connected to his work, entirely focused on the small wonders of alien biology. But as he reached for his scanner, an abrupt, high-pitched alarm blared through his earpiece, startling him out of his concentration. He quickly straightened, his calm demeanor replaced with a sharp alertness. A distress signal, a rare event out here, and more concerningly, it bore the unmistakable signature of the Galactic Council's flagship. With his heart pounding, Alex accessed his communicator, hoping to gather more information. The message was brief, urgent, and nearly overwhelmed by static, but he managed to discern that the flagship was damaged, stranded, and under threat. The signal also included one detail that made him pause. Aboard the flagship was Queen Xyra herself, the powerful, iron-fisted leader of one of the most technologically advanced alien civilizations. Alex knew of Queen Xyra, of course. Every human in the galaxy had heard of her. She ruled with a fierce intensity, her society valuing strength and technological superiority above all else, a world away from the values he cherished. "Do I really want to get involved?" he muttered to himself, scanning his surroundings as if the forest might offer him guidance. He had every reason to ignore the call. Humans, after all, were considered primitive by many species within the Galactic Council. For him to try and rescue the queen of an advanced alien empire felt almost absurd, like a mouse trying to pull a lion from a trap. Yet something in him stirred, a sense of duty, or perhaps compassion. It didn't sit well with him to turn his back, especially not when lives were at stake, no matter how proud or condescending those lives might be. Taking a steadying breath, Alex activated his communicator, signaling that he would respond to the distress call. As the message transmitted, he wondered if the Galactic Council's crew, let alone the Queen, would even accept his assistance. He was, after all, just a human, an outsider to their world of interstellar politics and advanced technology. Nevertheless, his ship's engines roared to life, lifting off from the alien surface and setting a course toward the flagship's last known coordinates. As he approached the enormous vessel, a sense of awe washed over him. The Galactic Council's flagship was a marvel, sleek and imposing, constructed from alloys that shimmered with an almost unnatural luster. But up close, he could see the damage, scorch marks along its hull, fractured metal where explosions had torn through vital systems. This was no accident. The ship had been deliberately sabotaged. The sight only reinforced his resolve, though a gnawing unease crept into his mind. Whoever had done this might still be nearby, watching. Docking with the damaged flagship was no easy task. Alex's hands moved instinctively over the controls, steadying his ship as it maneuvered through the wreckage. His fingers tightened around the control levers as he aligned his craft with the docking bay, managing to land smoothly despite the turbulent atmosphere surrounding the flagship. He took a deep breath before opening the airlock, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The air inside the flagship was stale, carrying an undertone of burnt circuitry and something else, a hint of fear perhaps, lingering in the silent corridors. As he stepped inside, he was met by a squad of armed alien guards, their eyes narrowing at the sight of him. They clearly weren't expecting a human, and their disapproving glares told him all he needed to know about his status here. "I'm Dr. Alex Carter," he announced, keeping his voice steady. "I received the distress call and came to help." One of the guards sneered, his mandibles clicking in a display of distaste. "You, a human? Our queen does not require the aid of primitives." Alex held his ground, refusing to let their contempt rattle him. "Regardless, I'm here now. Time is precious if your queen is in danger." The guard's glare intensified, but he relented, gesturing for Alex to follow. They led him through the corridors deeper into the heart of the ship. The grandeur of the vessel was undeniable, even under duress. The walls were adorned with intricate engravings, symbols of the Queen's empire, each marking a conquest or alliance. Finally, they reached the council chamber, a massive domed room with a panoramic view of the stars beyond. At its center stood Queen Xyra, flanked by her council members. She was as formidable as the tales suggested, her presence imposing even from across the room. Her silver scales shimmered under the dim light, her posture rigid with authority. But there was a flicker of something else in her gaze. Pain, the subtle tremor in her stance betrayed her, and Alex knew then that she had been injured in the attack. Queen Xyra's eyes narrowed as she observed him. "You are human," she stated, her tone laced with disdain. "And you presume to aid me?" Alex met her gaze steadily. "I'm here to help, whether you believe in my capabilities or not. Right now, your enemies are likely closing in, and we don't have time to waste." A murmur of discontent rippled through the council members, who looked at him as though he were an insect beneath their notice. But Queen Xyra raised a hand, silencing them. Her skeptical gaze never left him as she weighed his words. "Very well, human," she said, her voice dripping with reluctant acknowledgement. "Prove your worth. Lead us from this situation, and perhaps I will consider not discarding you when we are safe." The challenge in her tone was unmistakable, but Alex felt no resentment. He had expected hostility, had prepared himself for it, and yet, as he looked into her proud, piercing eyes, he sensed that this was not just about survival. It was an opportunity to prove that humanity was far more than what the galaxy perceived. Just as they turned to leave the chamber, a sound echoed from the corridor outside, a scraping, slithering noise that sent a chill down Alex's spine. He tightened his grip on his medical kit, every instinct on alert. He knew then that whatever had attacked the flagship wasn't finished. The threat was closer than any of them realized. As the scraping sound intensified, Dr. Alex Carter's senses sharpened, his pulse pounding as he took stock of the chamber and its exits. The council members murmured in rising agitation, their previously disdainful expressions now marred by fear. Queen Xyra's composure remained unbroken, though her gaze flickered briefly to Alex, as if evaluating him anew under the strain of impending danger. She clutched her side where an injury pulsed with a faint, iridescent glow beneath her scales. The wound was serious, and despite her attempts to hide it, her discomfort was clear. Alex steadied himself, shifting his weight slightly, keeping his gaze on the corridor. His xenobiologist instincts came alive, recognizing that, whatever this creature was, it was something natural to this hostile environment. The sharpness of its sound hinted at something armored or possibly scaled, qualities that made it resilient, dangerous. It was no simple predator, but a tactical advantage likely released by the saboteur to ensure the council members wouldn't leave this flagship alive. The guards tensed, readying their weapons, and one of them sneered at Alex again. "Stay out of the way, human. We don't need your primitive aid with such threats." Alex bristled but bit his tongue. He knew arguing with them would only waste precious seconds. Instead, he focused on assessing the limited tools he had on hand. His medical kit was his only real asset, packed with a few rudimentary tools and vials of synthesized plant toxins from his research planet. He hadn't expected to use them for anything beyond observation, but desperation breeds invention, and he was determined to make do. Before he could even devise a plan, the creature made its entrance, slithering into the chamber. It was massive, covered in thick scale-like plates, its many limbs tapping rhythmically against the floor. The guards immediately took action, firing bursts of blue energy at the beast. Their weapons crackled, leaving faint scorch marks on its armor but doing little else. With alarming speed, the creature lunged, its mandibles snapping at the closest guard, ripping into him before he had a chance to react. The guard's scream echoed, chilling Alex to the bone. "Move!" Alex shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos as he ushered the council members to a safer part of the chamber. The creature turned toward him, sensing the movement, and his heart pounded with the realization that he was its next target. In an instant, he yanked a vial of concentrated plant toxin from his kit, knowing it might be his only shot. "Distract it," he called out to the remaining guards, who exchanged a dubious glance but complied, unleashing a new volley of energy blasts. The creature hesitated, its attention divided between Alex and the guards. Using this moment, he sprinted toward its side, uncapping the vial with one swift motion and hurling the toxin directly onto its exposed joints. The liquid hissed as it made contact, and the creature recoiled, letting out a piercing shriek that reverberated through the room. For a brief moment, silence hung heavy in the chamber, as if the entire scene were holding its breath. Then the creature writhed, the toxin working into its system, making its movements sluggish. It flailed, losing coordination, and finally collapsed onto the floor, its limbs twitching in its final throes. The council members stared in shock, their expressions a mixture of awe and horror. "Primitive, huh?" Alex murmured, catching his breath as he glanced at the guard who'd sneered at him. The guard remained silent, his face a mix of resentment and reluctant respect. Queen Xyra, however, looked at him with a faint glimmer of acknowledgement, though her expression quickly hardened, masking whatever respect she might have felt. "Enough!" she commanded, her voice cold and unyielding. "Our mission is survival, not petty squabbles." She turned to Alex, her tone laced with a reluctant hint of approval. "It appears you have some skill after all, human." Alex gave a short nod, unfazed by her grudging tone. "That creature was just a test," he said, glancing down at the fallen guard with a grim expression. "Whoever sabotaged this ship wanted to make sure none of you left here alive. We're not out of danger yet." Queen Xyra's eyes narrowed, flicking over the group. "There may be more waiting in the shadows. We need to stay together and move quickly." The guards resumed formation around the council, their postures more rigid than before. Despite their initial dismissiveness, Alex could feel the subtle shift in their demeanor toward him. He had proven himself, at least enough to make them listen. As they moved through the narrow corridors, Alex noticed the tension in Queen Xyra's gait. Her injury was hindering her more than she let on, and he knew she wouldn't make it far without treatment. Taking a deep breath, he approached her cautiously. "Your Majesty," he began, his tone careful. "I know you don't trust me, but that wound needs attention. If we don't take care of it, it'll slow you down and put us all at greater risk." She glanced at him, her gaze sharp with suspicion, but also a trace of wariness that she couldn't entirely hide. "Do not presume to tell me what I need, human." Alex didn't back down. "I'm not telling you. I'm suggesting. I can stop the infection, which will give you the strength to lead us out of here. Your people need you at your best right now." Her gaze lingered on him, as though weighing his words, before she relented, nodding curtly. Without another word, she extended her arm, allowing him to treat the wound. He worked quickly, applying a salve from his kit, which contained a coagulant derived from an alien moss species known for its rapid healing properties. As he worked, he could feel her gaze burning into him, scrutinizing his every move. It was clear that she was unused to showing vulnerability, especially to a primitive species. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of distant machinery. Alex, still working on her wound, could sense that this moment was significant, a tentative bridge of trust forming between them. He had no illusions about her feelings toward humanity, but he could see in her eyes a begrudging respect beginning to take root. "Don't get comfortable with this, human," she warned softly, her voice low but edged with something that might have been gratitude. "You are useful for now, nothing more." Alex gave a brief nod, letting her words slide over him. "Understood, Your Majesty. I'm here to get us out alive, nothing more." They continued through the ship, navigating dimly lit corridors and flickering lights that barely illuminated the path ahead. The council members muttered quietly among themselves, their eyes darting nervously at each shadow that stretched across the walls. Alex kept his senses alert, aware that more dangers likely lurked ahead. Just as they rounded a corner, another strange sound echoed through the hallway, an eerie mechanical whine that sent chills down his spine. He knew, with sinking certainty, that they weren't alone. This threat, whatever it was, seemed more cunning than the last, calculated in its movements, waiting for them to advance further. A tense silence settled over the group. Queen Xyra raised a hand, signaling them to halt, her gaze sharp as she assessed their surroundings. The atmosphere crackled with tension as they waited, every breath fraught with the knowledge that danger lay just ahead. The eerie whine echoed down the narrow corridor, reverberating through the walls and sending a chill through the group. Dr. Alex Carter scanned the dimly lit hallways, alert for any sign of movement. He tightened his grip on his makeshift weapon, a metal rod he'd pulled from a broken panel, as he stood ready, poised between the council members and whatever threat lay beyond. Queen Xyra's gaze was steely, her stance unyielding despite the pain she tried to hide from her injury. Their forward progress slowed, every step taken with silent caution. The corridor was filled with long shadows cast by the flickering lights above, each one shifting as though alive. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was waiting, watching them. His instincts screamed at him to get out of this enclosed space and into more open terrain, where they wouldn't be cornered. Yet, they had no choice but to press forward. Turning back would only give their enemy the advantage of time. "Keep moving," Queen Xyra commanded in a harsh whisper, her voice a mixture of authority and strained patience. The council members obeyed, though Alex could see the uncertainty on their faces, their previous arrogance now tempered by fear. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached a side hatch that led outside, opening onto the rugged terrain surrounding the flagship. Alex released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding as he stepped out onto solid ground. The harsh landscape spread out before them, an expanse of jagged rocks and towering alien flora that loomed ominously under the strange, pale light of the planet's sun. It was a hostile environment, to be sure, but at least here they had options. "We'll need to find higher ground," Alex suggested, his voice calm but firm. "If we stay down here, we're too easy to track." Queen Xyra shot him a withering look, clearly unaccustomed to taking advice from a human. "I am aware of our tactical disadvantages, Dr. Carter," she replied, her tone dripping with condescension. "However, I would remind you that this is a rescue, not a research expedition. Speed is our priority." "Understood, Your Majesty," Alex replied, biting back any further comments. He knew that arguing with her was a waste of precious energy, and right now, survival took precedence over pride. He gestured for the group to follow, setting a brisk pace along the uneven ground, his eyes constantly scanning the alien flora around them. He'd read enough on this planet's ecosystem to know that some of its plants were as dangerous as its predators. They hadn't made it far when Alex noticed a strange tension among the council members. Their eyes darted furtively toward one another, their expressions betraying hints of suspicion and fear. Alex slowed his pace, his intuition telling him that something deeper than the immediate threats was at play. The council members, however, stayed close, their whispered exchanges barely audible as they glanced at Queen Xyra and then back at Alex. He felt a pang of unease. They hadn't trusted him from the beginning, of course, but this felt different, an atmosphere of distrust aimed not just at him, but at each other. Without warning, one of the council members, a slender figure with dark, scaled skin, turned on him with narrowed eyes. "You're leading us into a trap, aren't you, human?" The accusation hung in the air, weighted with the implication that Alex had somehow been conspiring against them all along. Alex took a steadying breath, keeping his tone level. "Look, I'm the one who responded to the distress signal. I have no interest in harming any of you. Right now, we're all trying to survive." The council member's gaze flicked to Queen Xyra, as if seeking her judgment, but she simply regarded Alex with that same unreadable expression, unwilling to reveal her own suspicions or lack thereof. "Enough of this," Queen Xyra declared finally, her tone cold and unwavering. "We're wasting valuable time. Dr. Carter is here under my order, and unless you have proof of betrayal, I expect you to follow without question." The council member fell silent, though the distrust in his eyes remained. Alex felt a mixture of relief and frustration. He had earned Queen Xyra's grudging approval, but the rest of the council clearly saw him as expendable. If anything went wrong, they wouldn't hesitate to blame him. As they moved onward, the terrain grew more treacherous. Towering cliffs loomed on either side, the ground littered with sharp stones and patches of thick, alien moss. The air grew colder, filled with a dampness that clung to their skin and seeped through their clothes. They were deep into hostile territory now, with no easy route back. Their progress was halted once more by a sudden, unexpected obstacle, a sheer ravine, wide and deep, cutting through the ground before them. The chasm stretched out in either direction, jagged edges rising like the teeth of some ancient beast. Queen Xyra and the council members exchanged anxious glances, clearly unwilling to risk the crossing. Alex moved to the edge, assessing the situation. There were scattered, thick vines hanging from trees on either side, trailing down into the ravine like natural ropes. They were far from ideal, but with some effort he thought they could construct a makeshift bridge across the gap. "We can use those vines," Alex suggested, pointing toward the trees. "If we secure them to these rocks, we could create a bridge to get everyone across." Queen Xyra scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "A primitive solution, as expected," she muttered, but Alex caught a flash of indecision in her gaze. Despite her harsh words, he could tell she was considering his plan. "We don't have any better options right now," he replied, his tone calm but firm. "Unless you'd prefer to wait here and hope your enemies show mercy." With a begrudging nod, she signaled her approval. Alex worked quickly, enlisting the help of a few council members to anchor the vines to solid rocks and trees. It was a precarious task, and more than once he had to steady himself as the ground shifted beneath him. But after what felt like an eternity, the makeshift bridge was ready, a narrow but passable route across the chasm. One by one, the council members began to cross, their expressions filled with a mixture of dread and determination. Alex went last, guiding Queen Xyra, who, despite her injury, made it across with a fierce, unrelenting resolve. As they neared the other side, a sound echoed from behind them, a low, rumbling growl that sent a chill through the group. The creature emerged from the shadows of the ravine, its massive form towering over them. With glistening scales and serrated claws, it was unlike anything Alex had seen, a predator perfectly adapted to this harsh landscape. Its eyes glinted with a savage intelligence as it prowled toward the bridge, intent on cutting off their escape. Without a second thought, Alex positioned himself between the creature and the council, his gaze fixed on the beast. He had no real weapons, no way to fend it off alone, but he could buy them time, enough, he hoped, for them to make it to safety. "Run!" he shouted, his voice echoing across the ravine. Alex's shout reverberated across the ravine, echoing off the jagged cliffs as the council members scrambled to safety. Queen Xyra hesitated for a fraction of a second, her pride fighting against the instinct to run. But as the monstrous predator prowled forward, its claws digging into the rock with each deliberate step, her resolve hardened. She turned to follow her council members, but not before casting one last skeptical glance at Alex, as though questioning why he would put himself in harm's way for them. The creature was closing in fast, each movement powerful and precise, revealing an intelligence that went beyond mere animalistic hunger. Its dark scales shimmered in the pale light, every muscle rippling as it stalked across the narrow bridge, testing its weight with calculated steps. Alex could feel his heart pounding, but he forced himself to stay calm, searching his mind for a strategy. He knew the creature wouldn't be easily fooled or intimidated. Its eyes locked onto him with an intensity that made it clear it recognized him as the immediate threat. With the council members safe on the other side, Alex took a deep breath and moved back toward the edge of the ravine, calculating the distance. He remembered the local plant toxins he'd used earlier. They'd proven effective on the previous creature, but this predator was far larger, and he only had one vial left. It would take perfect timing and placement to have any hope of slowing it down. Just as the creature lunged, Alex flung the toxin directly toward its eyes, the liquid splattering across its face in a faint, sizzling mist. The beast howled, thrashing as the toxin burned into its sensitive tissues, but its rage only seemed to intensify. It swiped blindly in his direction, narrowly missing him as he threw himself to the ground, scrambling backward. His heart raced as he realized that the toxin had only managed to enrage the creature instead of disabling it. "Alex!" Queen Xyra's voice echoed from the other side of the ravine, her tone sharp with frustration and, surprisingly, a hint of urgency. He glanced up to see her watching him, her expression conflicted, as if she couldn't decide whether to despise his courage or respect it. "You can't face it alone." "No choice," he muttered to himself, casting a quick look around for any advantage he could exploit. His gaze fell upon the unstable rocks above, teetering on the cliffside like a fragile dam waiting to burst. If he could create enough of a disturbance, he might be able to dislodge them, sending them crashing down on the beast. As the creature prepared to lunge again, Alex darted to the left, grabbing a large, jagged stone and hurling it toward the cliffside. It struck the precarious ledge, sending small rocks and pebbles tumbling down. The creature, now half blinded by the toxin, whipped its head toward the noise, its claws digging into the earth as it tried to find footing on the crumbling ledge. Alex didn't wait to see the results. He scrambled back across the narrow bridge, his every step sending vibrations through the vines holding it together. The creature let out a furious snarl, its thrashing sending larger stones cascading down the cliff, and finally, with a bone-shaking roar, the rocks above gave way. In a thunderous crash, they plummeted onto the creature, forcing it off balance and down into the depths of the ravine. Silence followed, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last few moments. Alex stood there, catching his breath, his muscles aching and heart pounding. He peered over the edge, seeing nothing but dust and shadows where the creature had fallen. He knew it might still be alive, but it was trapped for now, buying them a precious reprieve. He turned to see the council members watching him from the other side, their faces a mixture of relief and shock. Even Queen Xyra looked momentarily taken aback, her expression unreadable as she observed him with a newfound intensity. Alex crossed the bridge carefully until he was back on solid ground. He gave a brief nod to the council members, who shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, some of their previous disdain now tempered with a hesitant respect. "We need to keep moving," he said, breaking the silence. "That thing might not be the last of what's out here." Queen Xyra stepped forward, her piercing gaze locking onto his. "You chose to stay and face that beast alone," she stated, her tone one of reluctant admiration masked by skepticism. "Why?" Alex met her gaze calmly, Because it was the only way to ensure you all made it across safely. I'm not here to harm anyone. I'm here to help. She studied him for a moment longer, her sharp eyes softened by the smallest fraction. Very well, human, she replied finally with a hint of begrudging respect. You have proven useful. The last word hung in the air, as if it pained her to admit even that much. They pressed on, navigating the treacherous terrain. Alex moved with caution, keeping his senses sharp. The adrenaline from the confrontation was fading, replaced by the dull ache of exhaustion, but he couldn't afford to slow down. The council members still eyed him warily, and he sensed that not everyone shared the Queen's grudging respect. As they walked, fragments of whispered conversation drifted to his ears. The council members exchanged furtive glances, their voices barely above a murmur. Alex couldn't make out everything, but he caught enough to understand. Someone among them suspected foul play. The implications weighed heavily, but he kept his expression neutral, focusing on the path ahead. They reached a dense thicket of alien vegetation, its twisted roots and tangled vines creating a natural barrier. The Queen's injury slowed her down, and Alex noticed the pained grimace she tried to hide. She was losing strength, and though her pride held her upright, he knew it wouldn't last. We should take a brief rest, Alex suggested, keeping his tone neutral. You're injured, and the others could use a moment to recover. Queen Xyra's eyes narrowed, her pride flaring, but she didn't argue. Instead, she sank down onto a nearby rock, breathing heavily, her hand instinctively clutching her side. Alex knelt beside her, pulling out the remnants of his medical supplies. She watched him, her gaze a mix of suspicion and begrudging trust. I can treat this properly if you'll allow it, he offered, showing her the salve he'd used earlier. You may not want my help, but you need it if you want to continue. After a tense moment, she gave a brief nod, allowing him to apply the salve to her wound. As he worked, her expression softened, if only slightly, as though she were finally beginning to see him as something more than just a primitive nuisance. Before they could settle into a moment of respite, the sharp sound of footsteps reached their ears, closing in from all directions. Alex looked up, heart pounding, realizing they were surrounded. Shadows moved in the dense foliage, revealing the outlines of armed soldiers, hostile forces clearly prepared to ambush. Queen Xyra's face hardened, her gaze snapping toward Alex with an intensity that spoke of both anger and a desperate need to survive. He tightened his grip on his makeshift weapon, his mind racing as he calculated their odds. They had seconds before the ambush fell upon them, and he knew that once again, he'd have to find a way to protect the Queen, and himself, against nearly impossible odds. The footsteps grew louder, closing in with each passing second. Alex scanned the dense foliage, his mind racing. They were outnumbered, and with Queen Xyra injured, their chances of survival seemed bleak. The council members, already worn from their trek, exchanged fearful glances, and even the guards looked uncertain. Alex knew he had to act quickly, or this would be the end. He reached for the last of his makeshift supplies, pulling out a vial of concentrated plant extract he had synthesized during his initial research mission. It wasn't lethal, but it was potent enough to cause confusion and disorientation, hopefully buying them enough time to make a break for it. He looked to Queen Xyra, who observed him with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, her eyes narrowing as he held up the vial. Cover your face and eyes, he whispered to her and the nearby council members, his tone leaving no room for argument. When I throw this, we'll have a small window to escape. Head toward the clearing just ahead. There's enough ground cover for us to lose them. Queen Xyra hesitated, pride flashing across her face, but she gave a short nod and signaled her guards to follow his instructions. The moment the hostile soldiers broke through the thicket, Alex hurled the vial into their path. The glass shattered, releasing a fine mist of the plant extract into the air. Almost instantly, the soldiers began coughing and stumbling, their movements growing sluggish as the extract clouded their senses. Now! Alex shouted, grabbing Queen Xyra's arm and helping her to her feet. The group surged forward, breaking into a desperate run through the dense vegetation. Queen Xyra limped alongside him, her pride swallowed in the face of survival. Behind them, the disoriented soldiers thrashed blindly, unable to focus as the plant extract's effects took hold. The council members darted ahead, pushing past the thick underbrush, their once proud demeanor now replaced by fear and desperation. As they reached the clearing, Alex slowed, scanning the area for a defensible position. The landscape opened into a wide, rocky expanse dotted with clusters of boulders and jagged outcrops. He quickly directed the group to take cover behind the rocks, positioning themselves with clear lines of sight in case the soldiers recovered faster than expected. Queen Xyra slumped against a boulder, her breathing labored, and her injury now an open wound. Alex knelt beside her, retrieving the last of his medical supplies and working quickly to dress the wound. She watched him, her gaze softening with a glimmer of something close to gratitude. "You have risked much, human," she murmured, her voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "More than I would have expected from one of your kind." Alex shrugged, focusing on his work. "You needed help, and I was in the right place at the right time. Humanity isn't as primitive as your people might think. We value loyalty, compassion, qualities that don't rely on advanced technology." Queen Xyra's expression shifted, a flicker of introspection crossing her face. "Perhaps we have been too quick to judge," she conceded, though the admission seemed to cost her something. "But this is not over. Those soldiers will regroup, and they will find us." As if on cue, a shout echoed from the edge of the clearing. The hostile soldiers had recovered and were advancing, weapons at the ready. Alex scanned their surroundings, looking for any advantage. The rocky terrain offered some cover, but they couldn't hold out indefinitely against a larger, better-armed force. Just then, a plan began to form in his mind. It was risky, bordering on reckless, but it was their only shot. He turned to Queen Xyra, his eyes alight with determination. "There's a path through the rocks that leads to higher ground. We can set up a defensive position there, but we'll need to slow them down first." Queen Xyra's eyes narrowed. "And how do you propose we do that, human?" "By using the terrain to our advantage," Alex replied. "We'll dislodge some of the rocks and create an avalanche. It should block their path long enough for us to reach the top." The Queen studied him for a moment, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You are either brave or foolish," she remarked, "but I am willing to gamble on your plan." With her approval, Alex set to work, directing the guards and council members to position themselves along the rock ledge. He chose several large boulders that were precariously balanced, directing the group to push with all their strength. The soldiers were closing in fast, their shouts echoing across the clearing, but Alex forced himself to stay focused, counting down until the moment was right. "Now!" he shouted. Together they pushed, and with a great heave, the rocks began to shift. Gravity took over, and a cascade of boulders tumbled down the slope, crashing into the advancing soldiers with thunderous force. The soldiers scattered, their ranks broken as they scrambled to avoid the falling debris. For a few precious seconds, the path was clear, and Alex seized the opportunity. "Go up the path," he urged, helping Queen Xyra to her feet. The group scrambled up the narrow trail, their legs burning with the effort as they ascended the steep incline. The sound of the avalanche faded, replaced by the distant shouts of soldiers regrouping below. Alex could feel his own strength waning, but he pushed onward, driven by sheer willpower. At last, they reached the top, a high plateau that offered a panoramic view of the landscape. The soldiers were still far below, struggling to navigate the rubble-strewn path, giving Alex and the others a few precious moments to catch their breath. Queen Xyra surveyed the scene, her gaze filled with a newfound respect as she turned to him. "You have saved us, Alex Carter," she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Despite everything, you risked your life for those you had no reason to protect. That is an unusual quality among the species we have encountered." Alex shrugged, a faint smile crossing his face. "Humans aren't perfect, but we don't abandon those in need. Maybe it's primitive, or maybe it's just what makes us human." Queen Xyra was silent for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. Finally, she extended a hand, a small, simple gesture, yet profoundly significant coming from a ruler who once saw him as nothing more than a primitive. "Perhaps humanity has more to offer the galaxy than we realized," she said quietly, her voice carrying a promise of change. Alex clasped her hand, feeling the weight of her words and the potential they carried. In that moment, he knew his actions had sparked something profound, something that could reshape the way the galaxy viewed humanity. The soldiers below began to regroup, and Queen Xyra signaled for her guards to prepare for another move. But as they made their way toward the edge of the plateau, Alex knew that this was no longer a mere rescue mission. It was the beginning of something far greater, a bond of respect and understanding that would ripple across the galaxy. As they descended, Queen Xyra cast a final glance at Alex, a look of acknowledgement and something akin to admiration. For the first time, the vastness of the galaxy felt just a little bit smaller, a little more connected.